that you have to have that peace within inside. It has to be interior. You have to have that connection to God inside and just be at peace with him. And I just think that is what, besides her friendship, she should be known for, because really up until her death, right at the moment of her death, she focused on only what God wanted for her.
Well, Happy New Year and welcome to In the Company of Charity, a podcast of the Daughters of Charity. And I'm here in celebrating this new year, our first episode of 2022 with my good friend and co-host, Sister Liz Schoberg.
Hello, hello. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good year. Do you think so?
I don't want to, knock on wood, God's grace, come Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
We are moving in a good direction. No matter what the cost, we are here and God is with us. So
yeah, and I think this being our first episode of the new year and the particular topic of your interview with Lisa from the Shrine is really interesting, because we're talking about the shrine in Emmitsburg, Maryland, of Elizabeth Ann Seton, the first American-born saint. And
fun fact, we're both Elizabeth Anns.
Elizabeth Ann in a community with an American foundress named Elizabeth Ann. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I think that she will definitely give blessings.
Have not done this before. How have we not had this episode before?
Yeah, I don't know. I think she's probably just been waiting patiently for us to remember how important she is to our community and to us. I wasn't necessarily named after Elizabeth Ann Seton, but when I was in the seminary in Emmitsburg on her birthday, all the Elizabeth Anns had to go up, and you got a pin that said, "I'm an Elizabeth Ann."
A ribbon. I had the same experience.
Yeah, and you felt a little foolish, but then there were like a ton of Elizabeth Anns there. And I thought, wow, I don't appreciate this woman as much as other people do. And I think for me, that was a revelation that, very scripturally speaking, right? The prophet is never appreciated in his own town, In this case, the prophetess, the prophet Elizabeth Ann is not appreciated by some of us in our own community. And so really, really, that prompted me to get to know her a little bit more. And this interview was so wonderful. I just think Lisa is so great as a storyteller and just as an advocate for the shrine and for the prayers and just the work of the shrine is amazing to me.
Yes, and thousands of people make a pilgrimage to Emmitsburg, Maryland, to go to the shrine and walk the sacred grounds. And here's a saint who was truly American. She was a pioneer in a lot of ways, and going out into the rough country of Maryland, still in some ways very rustic out there in Western Maryland. So definitely, we don't want to spoil any stories in the actual interview, but she really is a saint for all people.
Yeah, absolutely. She when you hear her story told by Lisa, it's just amazing when you think about what she accomplished, what she lived through. And just the way that she helped the community develop in a time that was so difficult. So she really is a woman for all seasons, for sure.
And may we have the same kind of trust in divine providence and willingness to step out in faith that Mother Seton did. She really is someone to be admired and imitated.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we really hope you enjoy this episode, and the patron here, the patron of our podcast, the patron of the two Elizabeth Anns that you're listening to right now. We're We love this saint, and I'm sure you will too after hearing all these awesome stories.
Absolutely. Enjoy, everyone.
Welcome, everybody. This is Sister Liz, and we're here with Lisa Donahue, who is from the Shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton in Emmitsburg, a place very close to my heart. And so I just want to give her the opportunity to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about, what you're doing at the shrine. And then we're going to get into our topic about Mother Seton, who is one of my favorite saints in the world, on the planet, like very near and dear to my heart. So thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This is, it's good for me to be able to talk about Elizabeth Ann Seton. I love her as you do, and have gotten to know her more through working at the shrine. I think she's interesting because she's not that Joan of Arc kind of figure. She's people look at her and think, well, what did she do? And the more I research her, the more extraordinary I think she is. And so I like being able to share that. And that's part of what I get to do at the shrine. Recently, in the past year, I've been able to do a lot of research on her, and it's opened up like so many doors, like through our exhibits, but also through like her letters and our programs and living history, and just really getting the story right and really being able to delve into that story, which we had never done before.
And I have to say, we're going to talk a lot about the will of God, divine providence, and all that. But before that, I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. That I know we had some articles that came from the Sisters of Charity of New York down to the shrine, and thank you for sharing all of that. Maybe just touch on those items that we have in the shrine right now as an exhibit.
Yeah, so we were contacted by the Sisters of Charity of New York last year, and they had some items of Elizabeth's that they were willing to send to the shrine. And these are pretty impressive, and in my thoughts, because one of them is her bonnet and her shawl, which we had none of her clothing prior to that. So it's also some of her son William's possessions and his children. And so Elizabeth, of her 5 children, William was the only one to have children. He had 8 children that lived to adulthood, but only a couple of them had children. And only one of them had children, Isabella, of her own, that lived really past the age of 30. And unfortunately, none of them had children. So it really stops. Elizabeth's line stops with her great grandson, Ferdinand. And a lot of these items were in his possession. And when he passed away, he gave them to the sisters in New York. And then they just recently sent them to us. So the way I like to do a tour is through storytelling. So I attach a story to all of the items to really show how the family progressed with their faith, and how Elizabeth was so instrumental in that, and really who she was. And so as you found out, I like to talk a lot, and I like to tell stories to really come together to who Elizabeth is. And that's really what I have found out. No matter who I have picked, if I pick her daughter, Anna Maria, for example, which we'll get into, the story comes back to Elizabeth, because she was so instrumental in their lives, or she learned something through their life. And it really helped her get to where she wanted to be by the time she died.
Her story itself is just fascinating. I mean, everything from her growing up and the situation with her family of origin, and getting married and having these kids, and the issue with William's sickness and eventual death. I mean, it's a fascinating story, but it's a story of tremendous suffering and tragedy in a lot of ways, that she faced throughout her life. And I know, like, we can all kind of go back and look at like her biography and those details, but I think one of the things that's really interesting is the spirituality and the spiritual growth along the way. And so, I think it's good if you want to speak to a little bit, okay, where was she? How did she grow? What were those things that kept her focused? Because, you can be consumed by suffering and let it be an opportunity for despair versus any kind of growth or trust in God or realizing the presence of God in these situations.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about Elizabeth, because she did suffer through those things that you're talking about, the loss of her mother when she was 3. Within a year, between 3 and 4, she loses her mother, her baby sister, her grandfather, who she was very close to. And already at that young age, she's thinking about God. She's thinking about heaven. She takes her father not being around very much because he was a doctor and he was studying and very busy, very much to heart, and we see that. That's why I think she's so relevant today. We see that with so many children that don't have parents in their homes, and they feel that loss so deeply. And she felt that. I mean, she felt that. And when she was older and married and seeing people around her pass away, she loses both her father and her father-in-law within 2 years of each other, then her husband. And then she loses her daughters as well. And in the time that she was in Emmitsburg, in those 11 years, there's 19 deaths that happen there between the sisters and her daughters and sister-in-law. So she takes it very seriously. And I think that, to your point, is what's interesting about her. She could have become very sad, very depressed about that. And she does on some occasions, but then she searches, well, how can I figure out what God is doing here? How can I figure out what he wants from me here? And I think that is right there what makes her a saint, because she doesn't settle in there. She doesn't stay in her sadness or her depression or her anger or whatever. She tries to work through that. And by working through that, she becomes closer to God. And, someone said to me, a priest friend of mine said to me when I was taking him through the exhibit, that she is also like a patron saint for a happy death, just like Saint Joseph, who she followed and looked up to, because her goal was to try to figure out how to get people as close to God as they possibly could and get to that happy death. And we see that for not only herself, but her children, her friends, her family. I mean, it's extraordinary, really, how she was really working on that. And that's what's so exciting to me, is just the more I uncover, the more I see that this was what she was working on in her mind. And, the will of God that I kind of came about was through her daughter, Anna Maria's death. And so in the fall of 1811, when Anna Maria is dying, Elizabeth isn't taking it very well. I mean, this was her oldest child. It was a child that she was very close to when Anna Maria is 3 years old. She writes her this beautiful letter of, you're my future friend, my future confidant. And she looked forward to this life that they were going to share together. Anna Maria is with her in the lazaretto when her husband's dying. And in those 6 weeks that he's in the lazaretto, really, it's a miracle that kind of happens there, because the first day she's sad and she's crying because of them laying on this brick floor and he's so sick. And then they kind of transform it to where they're studying scripture and they're praying together. And she really realizes by the time of his death that she never would have gotten him to that place had they been in New York. She never would have had that time alone with him to help him get to that happy death, that peace, if she had been with family and friends. And so she thanks God for that time. And I think that's where you really see her looking at peace as not happiness, but looking at peace as resigning to the will of God and trusting him that there is a reason why this is happening. And I mean, to me, that's beautiful and extraordinary, for her to get to that point.
It's a very different scenario than what I would call the prosperity gospel of, so many spiritualities. It's like, well, if I'm good with God, then things should go well for me. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm praying, if I'm doing good works, if things are cool on my spiritual level, like things should be okay. And there shouldn't be any kind of struggle or adversity. And if there is, it means that, there's something not right.
Right.
And I think, maybe you can touch a little bit on like, okay, as Catholics, we have a different view of our faith, and how do we respond when those struggles come our way? Because, if there's no meaning, then yeah, let's get rid of all the suffering. Let's find a way to medicate, or let's find a way to escape, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Catholics, we do try to look at any cross we have to bear or suffering as there's a purpose. There's a reason that we're going through this. And I think that that's where the peace is. Like, there's peace in trusting that there is a reason for this, and I think that that's what she comes to find out. And I think that that's what's so wonderful about her letters. And so, with Anna Maria, in that fall, she's very upset. She's honest about it. She doesn't feel like being charitable, and she's struggling. Where Anna Maria, her daughter, who she has taught the faith, is the opposite. She's looking at her death as, she says to her mother, Mama, isn't this where you want me to be? Isn't this where you want me to be, looking for eternity? And she uses her death to teach others about dying. And for Anna Maria, that was a very painful death. I mean, Mother Seton writes that her bones were thin and fracturing and coming through her skin, and she was almost blind. But, Mother Seton gets it together. She gets the rules ratified. She gets Archbishop Carroll to ratify the rules so that Anna Maria can become a sister before she dies in March. And then that following October in 1812, she kind of goes through that depression again, where she's out at Anna Maria's grave and she's frustrated because she wants answers. She wants to know, has Anna Maria made it to eternity? And this is where she starts working with Father Brute. And what's interesting is those few months that they work together, it kind of turns to where she settles into, okay, I'm going to follow God's will as best I can. And now she's teaching Father Brute, like how to do that. And she's telling him, don't rely on my word. You have to rely on God's word. But which I think is so wonderful. But then when I was looking at her devotion to Saint Teresa of Avila, then I realized she's trying to do this through finding that interior peace, which she writes about, she talks about it. And as early as 1804, she's starting to write about this. And so in 1815, when Rebecca, her other daughter, is really sick and her son has just left for Italy and she's going through this dark period, she says to Father Brute, do not be sad for me, that this sadness is a point of grace. And I think in those few years, we see that transition of, she realizes, I'm going to have hard times, I'm going to have dark times, but there's peace in relying on God to know that this is what he wants for me, for whatever reason. This is the will that he had for Anna Maria. This is the will that he has for Rebecca, and I need to trust that.
Mm. And I know you mentioned at one point before about how she communicated that to her sons, of I want you, I forget the phrase you used. It was like, I'd rather you be in heaven, I'd rather you have the faith.
Yeah. So, she was nervous about having William go in the Navy. And most people assume it's because she was afraid that he would die. But she even says to him at one point, I really don't care if you die. Not meeting you in heaven is something that I could not stand. And so I think, with her sons, she worried very much, as we all do with our children, that they are somehow going to fail, that they are somehow not going to get to heaven. And that is what she worried about. She worried about that for her children very much. And, she dies really not knowing the outcome of that. William is still in the Navy. Catherine is not married. She's very unsettled. And Richard, her son, her wayward son, we like to say, was very much not settled. And so she has to, at those last moments, just give it all to God. And we see that when Richard comes to see her in December, and he only stays for a few hours, which the sisters were very upset about. Sister Cecilia Conway was very upset about it. But Mother Seton knew that this is all that Richard could give at that time. And she gave him to God and just, this is all I can do at this point. And I think that is a lot easier said than done. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. I think it's very difficult today to do that. I actually had an interesting conversation with a visitor once about that, how we're losing those opportunities. And this is a tangent, but we're losing those opportunities to trust God because now we can do it ourselves. Meaning, for example, like with our children, when I was growing up, if I went out, my mom just had to trust that I would be home. There was no way to get in touch with me. And now, she had to rely that God would get me home safely. And now with our phones, my kids are 5 minutes late. I'm texting them, and I'm on them. Like, where are you? Text me when you get there, text me when you leave, all of that kind of stuff. And so now we're losing those opportunities to trust God, because we can do it on our own. And I think she is a beautiful example of just letting it all go and put it in God's hands. And I mean, for me, the more I get into her readings and realizing that she really did speak to what St. Teresa spoke of also, is that you have to have that peace within inside. It has to be interior. You have to have that connection to God inside and just be at peace with him. And I just think that is what, besides her friendship, she should be known for, because really up until her death, right at the moment of her death, she focused on only what God wanted for her. And I think I was telling you the story, which I find very interesting, that, a couple months before she died, she ends her friendship with Father Brute. And people are always shocked by that because they had been so close for 10 years. But she writes that to another priest friend, that it was a mutual decision, that when she's listening to him, she's not listening to God, and that's a subtraction that she cannot afford. And I think that that's so interesting, because I know for myself, I would not have the strength to do that. I would not have the strength to end those relationships, because I want to spend my last few minutes on earth totally focused on God. And she did. And I think that is just extraordinary. I mean, she says that, he is saying things to her, the sisters are saying things to her, like she's going to bypass heaven and go straight to purgatory, that, she's going to be in heaven soon, which are very typical things, I think, for people to say when they're next to someone who's dying. But she didn't want to hear it. And she completely blocked it out. And the night that she's dying, she dies somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. I mean, she's just praying constantly, and she has her eyes transfixed on the crucifix. I mean, she just wanted to be so close to God, as close as she could get. When most people, I think, want to spend those last few minutes of their life with the people around them, and not that that's wrong. I just think that it goes to showing her desire to be with God.
Absolutely. And I want to, switch gears a little bit, because she has that personal spirituality and that relationship with God, thick and thin, right? How does that translate into what the sisters are doing with the young people, trying to raise up good, Christians in education, teaching children the basics of the faith and the foundations of reading and writing and stuff like that. So can you speak a little bit about, the kids that were around, and then maybe into sort of what you're doing to tell that part of the story?
So, yeah, I mean, another part of what I've come to realize with the Sisters and Daughters of Charity is just the ripple effects of what has happened in the past couple hundred years, and what the lives, the millions of lives that have been changed through just teaching those basic things, through your, the education and the charitable works of taking care of people in need. And so we wanted to delve into that a little bit more. We wanted to start not only a living history program to tell those stories of the sisters, but also to tell the stories of the students, that are there. And so we started this junior history interpreter program. And we have girls that are 9 to 16 years old. We have 28 girls now. And we teach them how to be interpreters, how to tell the stories of what was happening at the academy in 1818. Through those lessons, for example, the first lesson is calligraphy, but not only how to write calligraphy, but why was teaching reading and writing so important then? When Mother Seton comes to Emmitsburg, it's between 700 and 800 people living here. A lot of them had not been to school. Only 12% of the country was being educated at that time. And they didn't know how to read and write. So what did that look like? So when you don't know how to read and write in 1818 and transportation is extremely limited and you're in a very poor area, when people moved, which could be your children, your parents, your siblings, you never heard from them again. And the other thing is most of those girls had not left Emmitsburg. There was no transportation. And so they didn't even know of a world that had existed outside of Emmitsburg. And so Mother Seton really wanted to change that. So she started her school almost immediately for girls that lived here in this area. But then she also accepted boarders. And so those were girls from some of the wealthiest families in the country. Those were Charles Carroll's granddaughters. Those were Judge Gaston, who was a senator from North Carolina's granddaughters. And so you have these different levels of social status. You have these different levels of education. But the basic thing that she's teaching them, besides the schooling, is those charitable works. And so these girls start going up into the mountains. They're helping to feed people. They're helping to clothe people. And so she's making that part of her school. But just the life that she gave the students that lived here, especially the ones that might not have even heard music before, a good piece of music, or had been able to see beautiful artwork. And these are things that she brought to their lives, and also teaching them the faith. And she was right. If she taught these girls the faith, and they would pass it on to their children. And you see that through the relationships that she had with these girls. And what's nice about our program is that the second half of the program, I assign them a student that actually lived here. And so then we together do the research, and we bring that person to life. And we help them tell visitors, the story of why they were here, what they meant, and in a very clever way, also what would become of them. For example, Esther Kearney lived here in Emmitsburg. She was the last living person to have known Mother Seton. She dies when she's, I think, 102. She was interviewed in 1910 by the Vatican. So the young girl that plays her, she'll say things like, I hope someday to tell the whole world about Mother Seton, because she does. But she also, we have that story of the first time she met Mother Seton, sitting on her lap as a 6-year-old, and her beautiful dark eyes. And so it's really important to us. But I also tell each of these girls that Mother Seton chose them, that they were brought to this program because Mother Seton chose them for this program. And I believe that. I think that saints attach themselves to us as well and lead us in a way. And I think Mother Seton is attached to these girls. I think she's helping them. The changes that we see in them through this program, the understanding that they start to have of why the school is important, my Mother Seton was important, and the things that she did to help these girls change their lives. You can see it through the JHIs. And they're a lot of fun as well. They're a lot of fun to have around. But I think it's important because of the work that has been done in the last 200 years by the sisters and daughters. We see it not only through the education, but even the nursing, the Civil War. I mean, it's extraordinary. And so we want to be part of keeping that story alive.
Can you mention, because I know we'll have to wrap up here in a few minutes, but can you mention some of the things that the Shrine has done to kind of bring those things to life? I know you have the young people doing history when they come through on the tours and in period costumes and all that stuff. I know that there's a lot of other additional things that the Shrine does to kind of help people connect with, whether that's the Civil War or the story of Mother Seton or Catherine. These are really cool things. I want to make sure we touch on those as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Shrine right now is doing a lot of things, which is great. So we have our junior history interpreters. We also have living history interpreters who are portraying sisters that were here during that time, which is great because they have a whole nother layer of a story to tell. We have our Civil War tours, which really tell the story of how nursing became so important. It started with Mother Seton. It was formally started in 1823 and became so important during the Civil War. We have letters of families, of children of soldiers that were so appreciative of what the sisters did for their fathers. And I think that's important to tell as well. But we also have like our special events like Back from the Dead, which is a tour that you do in the evening, and you go through the cemetery and you encounter different saints, and the devil always makes an appearance. So that's fun. But to tell those stories as well. And we see visitors. There was a visitor a few years ago that just stood in front of the people in purgatory because we had them portray that they had died in a car accident, and her daughter had just died in a car accident a few weeks before. And she just stood there for the longest time. Or we have kids say things to us like, well, I'm always told that I have a guardian angel. I didn't know that I had a devil that followed me as well, and just getting those points across through this reenactment of the saints, it's really cool. And then we have candlelit tours with our junior history interpreters to show and tell those stories of Christmas time, which is also important. I mean, Mother Seton designed the altar in her at the academy at the White House because she wanted the students to remember the gift that God had given us through the birth of Jesus, our salvation. And she would always say, give a gift to the infant Jesus and do a work of kindness. And so I think those stories are also important. And then we do something called Door to Bethlehem, which is take off the Las Posada. You go and visit 8 doors outside, and you get turned away by people facing today's issues. And then you make it to the 9th door, which is the Basilica. So it's just a beautiful story at Christmas time. We do things like Seeds of Hope, which is a group that is, they do outreach to people that might not be able to come or afford to come to the shrine and to hear Mother Seton's story. And so they're able to come and spend the day and have a really good meal and share that time together. And that has really grown. So that's beautiful. So we've done a lot of great things in the past year. We started a prayer line as well. And hopefully it'll keep going because, like I said, the more I open up Mother Seton's story, the more I realize how relevant she is today, and how the things that she faced really haven't changed. She experienced those hardships, like you said, and really every role that a woman can hold. I mean, really, I mean, she was a sister, but also a wife. And, she was a mother and a business owner, and she really reached out to people. I'm sorry. Sister Mary Claire Hughes just recently said, that she was a friend. She's like, she's my friend. And this is a sister that's, 90, I think she's 97, 98 right now. And that's what we keep seeing over and over again, is that people look to Mother Seton as a friend. Like, she understands what you're dealing with because she's been through it all.
For anyone who's listening who is near Emmitsburg or within driving distance, like what can you say about grounds and the sacredness, and what would you say to convince them that they need to come and visit the Shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton?
Well, first off, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, the grounds are beautiful, very peaceful. I mean, they've been able to really maintain that, I think, through the grounds, through the trees, the witness trees, and the 2 historic homes. And I think as you move through them, if you go through them on tour, it really is about storytelling. It's not just seeing that this belonged to Mother Seton and this belonged to Mother Seton, but what did that mean? And what was that like, and why was that important? And as we go through each room, we talk about that. We talk about her story, the sisters, the students, And you really get that part, I think, of American history that you don't usually get. These were everyday people, and they were dealing with hardships and hard times. And you're able to hear those stories of how they got through them. And then the church itself, I mean, the basilica itself is just stunning. It's just such a peaceful place. Emmitsburg is an extremely small town, and yet there's this beautiful shrine and history that has happened there. And I think even for people that are not Catholic, I think it's just such a nice historic place, such a beautiful story of human beings that lived in the early 1800s and how they did that and how they were able to come through that together. So yeah, I think everyone should come and spend time there.
And if you can't come, where can they find information about the shrine or some of that media stuff that folks can access about Elizabeth Ann Seton's story?
Yeah, and what has happened, a blessing of COVID, if I could say, is that in the past year, we've started doing virtual tours, which we had wanted to do, but had never really started doing. And COVID kind of forced us to do it. And now we do virtual tours, which you can find on our website, the National Shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton, and sign up for a virtual tour. And we have school groups now that are signing up from Alaska, California, Canada. Even we had some people from South America. These are people that would never have been able to come to the shrine, and yet they're able to get this tour and hear her story, and see the things that we have there and make those connections.
Awesome. Lisa, thank you so much. And I hope we can have you on again to talk more about Mother Seton, because this has been such a gift.
Oh, good. Thank you. Obviously I like to talk about her. So yes.
All right. Well, God bless you.
Thank you.